Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. You know why you're here, right? Keeping those UPSC prep skills sharp. Gotta stay on top of the latest developments, especially in the Indian economy.
Absolutely. And one development that's definitely making waves is the recent change in how India classifies its micro, small, and medium enterprises, or as we all know them,
Mm.
MSMEs.
Yeah, this came into effect just recently on April 1st, 2025, right after the union budget.
Correct. And it's a pretty significant change. The investment and turnover limits that define these categories have been revised upward.
Oh yeah, big time. And we're going to break down those changes, the thinking behind them, the reactions so far, all of it. We're basing our deep dive today on some great reporting from the Indian Express, so let's get into it.
Sounds good.
Okay, so first things first. What exactly are these new thresholds, before we jump into the why and the how?
Right. So under the old system, a micro enterprise was defined as having an investment of up to 1 crore and a turnover of 5 crore.
Okay.
Now, those limits have been bumped up significantly. For micro enterprises, it's 2.5 crore for investment and 10 crore for turnover.
Okay, so more than doubled.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Now, for small enterprises, the old limits were 10 crore investment and 50 crore turnover.
Right.
Those have jumped to 25 crore investment and 100 crore turnover.
Wow, so those have been basically multiplied by two and a
Yeah.
half.
Yeah, and then finally, for medium enterprises, the old limits were 50 crore investment and 250 crore turnover. They've been raised to 125 crore investment and 500 crore turnover.
Okay, wow. So essentially, all the limits have been raised by 2.5 times for investment and doubled for turnover.
Exactly. It's a pretty substantial change. It really changes the landscape of what constitutes an MSME in India.
It does. And why, do you think? I mean, what's the rationale behind such a dramatic shift?
Well, from the government's perspective, a key objective seems to be facilitating the growth and ambition of these enterprises.
Okay, I see.
The argument is that the old classifications may have, unintentionally, acted as a ceiling. Businesses may have felt disincentivized to grow beyond a certain point.
Yeah, because they would lose out on those benefits.
Precisely. So by raising the limits, the government is trying to encourage MSMEs to scale up, invest more, and increase their turnover. It's saying, hey, you can grow bigger and still enjoy the support that comes with being an MSME.
It does kind of make sense. I mean, it's all about growth, right?
Exactly. And for our listeners who are preparing for the UPSC exams, this links directly to several important themes: economic growth, promoting manufacturing and exports, and generating employment. These are all key areas that the government is focusing on, and this policy shift is very much in line with those broader goals.
So would you say it's fair to say that the government is basically betting on a kind of grow bigger, thrive better approach?
I think that's a fair assessment. The idea seems to be that by allowing these businesses to operate on a larger scale, they'll become more competitive, create more jobs, and contribute more significantly to the economy.
Right, so potentially good for the economy as a whole.
Potentially. And it's interesting to note that many industry bodies, like the Federation of Indian Micro and Small and Medium Enterprises, FISME, have actually come out in support of these changes.
Oh, really? So they're on board with this shift?
Yeah, largely FISME's Secretary General has articulated several reasons for their support, and it's worth understanding their perspective.
Okay, so what are they saying?
Well, one of their key points is that these increased limits acknowledge the reality of inflation and the rising costs of inputs.
Yeah, that's true. Prices have been rising across the board for everything.
Exactly. So FISME's argument is that the old limits weren't really reflecting the current economic situation. A business could end up being classified as medium simply because of price increases, even if its actual production or sales volume hadn't changed that much.
Right, so basically they're just keeping up with the times.
Yeah, updating the definition to reflect the current reality.
Makes sense. What else?
Another important point FISME makes is the need to encourage what they call vertical growth, as opposed to horizontal duplication.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, for our listeners preparing for their exams, could you break down what exactly that means? Vertical versus horizontal growth?
Sure. So imagine you have a textile manufacturer who's doing really well. They're nearing the old limit for becoming a medium enterprise.
Okay.
Under the old system, to stay classified as small and keep those benefits, they might be tempted to open a new, totally separate unit that basically does the same thing as the first one. More of the same horizontally.
Right, right. So they wouldn't actually be growing in terms of their operations or capabilities.
Exactly. Now, what FISME wants to see is vertical growth, meaning that same textile manufacturer could now invest in better technology, expand their product line, hire more skilled workers, and even vertically integrate different stages of the production process, all within the same company.
I see.
So instead of just having more units doing the same thing, you have one company doing more and getting better.
So it's like becoming more sophisticated and adding more value within the existing structure.
Exactly. And FSME believes that this is the kind of growth that will make Indian MSMEs more competitive on a global scale.
It does sound like a more, I don't know, a smarter approach to growth.
It does. It's about quality over quantity.
Right, right. Now, you mentioned foreign investment earlier. How does that tie into all of this?
Well, FSME believes that these higher thresholds can also attract more foreign investment into the Indian MSME sector.
Okay, and how so?
A company classified as medium under the new rules might actually still be considered small by international standards.
I see, yeah.
So, for foreign investors looking to partner with or even acquire businesses in India, these larger MSMEs become a more attractive proposition. They have the benefits of being an MSME, but they're operating on a scale that's more in line with global business.
That makes sense. And of course, foreign investment is always good news for any economy.
Absolutely. It brings in capital, expertise, and helps integrate Indian businesses into global value chains.
Right. Now, FSME also talked about how the old classifications might have actually discouraged businesses from growing. How does that work?
Well, as we mentioned before, crossing that threshold into a higher category meant losing certain benefits.
Right.
So some businesses, even if they were capable of expanding, might have chosen to stay small just to hold on to those advantages.
It's like they were being penalized for being successful.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And that's not a recipe for a dynamic and growing economy. FSME's argument is that by raising the limits, you remove that fear of a benefits cliff. You allow businesses to grow more organically and reach their full potential.
Okay, so from that perspective, it does seem like a step in the right direction. But as with any major policy change, especially one with such wide-ranging implications, there are always different viewpoints and concerns to consider, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are always trade-offs. And this particular change has definitely sparked some debate, particularly among organizations representing the micro and small enterprises.
Oh, way.
They've written to the Ministry of MSME outlining their concerns.
Mm.
Yeah, it seems they're not entirely convinced that this move is beneficial for everyone, especially the smallest players in the sector.
And their concerns are?
Their main concern is about the potential for the larger medium enterprises to benefit disproportionately from schemes and policies that were meant for the entire MSME ecosystem.
I see what they mean.
They point out that medium enterprises make up less than 0.01% of all MSMEs in India.
Really? Wow. That's
And-
tiny.
Yeah, so their worry is that this small group, even though they've now been reclassified, will now have an unfair advantage in accessing benefits that were originally intended for the vast majority. The micro and small units that make up almost 99.99% of the sector.
So their concern is about equity, essentially, whether the benefits will truly reach the most vulnerable.
Exactly. And this concern is particularly pronounced when it comes to public procurement.
Oh, right, yeah.
There's a government mandate that 25% of all public procurement must be from micro and small units. The worry is that with these larger medium enterprises being included under this broader definition of small tucks, they'll be able to muscle their way in and grab a bigger share of those contracts.
Right, because they have more capacity, more resources to compete for those bigger contracts.
Exactly. And that could potentially crowd out the genuinely micro and small enterprises who might not be able to compete at that level.
So a company with a 100 crore turnover, now categorized as small, is competing with a company with a turnover of under 1 crore. It does seem a little mismatched.
Right. The playing field doesn't seem entirely level.
So what about access to credit? Would that be affected as well?
That's another major concern. Under what's called priority sector lending, banks in India are required to allocate a certain percentage of their loans to specific sectors, like agriculture and MSMEs.
Right, to make sure these crucial sectors get the funding they need.
Exactly. And within the MSME category itself, there are further targets for lending to microenterprises. But even with these mandates in place, micro units already face challenges in getting those loans.
Yeah, they often struggle to meet those stricter lending criteria.
Exactly. And the fear is that with the new classifications, banks might be even more inclined to lend to the larger, small and medium enterprises.
So those are seen as safer bets, right? Bigger loans, less risk.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So the very businesses that need financial support the most, the microenterprises, could end up getting squeezed out even further.
And I read somewhere that these organizations have even suggested either going back to the old classifications or creating a whole separate department just for micro and small enterprises.
That's right. It seems they feel very strongly that the needs of the smallest businesses might get lost in this push to help the larger MSMEs grow.
A separate department does sound pretty drastic.
It does, but it shows how deeply they feel about this issue. They believe that a more focused approach is needed to truly support those millions of micro and small businesses that are the backbone of the Indian economy.
It's a very valid point, I think. So apart from these concerns about procurement and credit, what other broader impacts do you think we might see on the MSME sector?
Well, one important thing to consider is the timing of this reclassification.
Okay.
It's happening in the context of a post-pandemic recovery that hasn't been even across all sectors.
Right. Some businesses are still struggling to get back on their feet.
Exactly. So some analysts are saying that this might be too soon. It could benefit those who have already recovered, while putting those who are still lagging further behind at a disadvantage.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a race when some runners haven't even had a chance to stretch yet.
Exactly. Another critical issue is data. The last comprehensive survey on MSMEs in India was done back in 2015-16.
Wow, that's almost a decade old.
Yeah. So making such a major policy shift based on potentially outdated information raises concerns about whether it's really going to be effective.
Right, you need good data to make good policy, otherwise you're just shooting in the dark.
Exactly. Now, one of the aims of this policy, or at least a part of it, is to address what's called the missing middle phenomenon in Indian industry.
Oh yeah, the missing middle. You hear about that a lot, but for the benefit of our listeners, could you explain what exactly that means?
Sure. So the missing middle refers to the fact that in India, you have a lot of very small businesses and a few very large corporations.
Right, yeah.
But there's a gap in the middle.
A lack of those medium-sized companies that are crucial for a healthy economy.
Exactly. And as we discussed earlier, one reason for this could be that the old classification system disincentivized growth. Businesses preferred to stay small to hold on to benefits.
So they never really reached that medium stage.
Precisely. So the government is hoping that by raising the thresholds, they'll encourage more businesses to scale up and fill that missing middle.
Right, so it's all about creating a more robust and diverse industrial landscape.
Exactly. Now, whether that actually happens, that's a question for the future.
It is. There are a lot of factors at play.
A lot of ifs and buts.
So in your view, what are the most important questions that our listeners, those preparing for the UPSC exams, should be thinking about regarding the future of the MSME sector in light of these changes?
Well, I think one of the most fundamental questions is about equity.
Right, that keeps coming up.
Yeah, and it's crucial. Will the benefits of this reclassification be distributed fairly across the entire MSME sector? Or will it end up favoring the larger players?
The big fish in the pond swallowing up all the resources.
Exactly. And that leads to the second big question. What specific steps will the government take to ensure that micro and small enterprises don't get left behind in this new landscape?
Right, because it's not enough to just change the classifications on paper.
Exactly. You need targeted support,
Right.
better access to credit, easier ways to do business, all of that.
And without that support, the intended benefits might never actually reach those who need them the most.
Precisely. It's about creating a level playing field, not just shifting the goalposts.
Well said. So to wrap up our discussion today, I think it's safe to say that this reclassification of MSMEs, as reported by the Indian Express, is a pretty major development.
Definitely one. One with the potential to reshape the Indian economy in significant ways.
We've seen that the investment and turnover limits have been raised quite substantially.
By a factor of 2.5 for investment and double for turnover.
Right. And the stated goals, which organizations like FESME support, are all about encouraging growth, boosting investment, creating jobs, and addressing the challenges of inflation and that disincentive to grow that we talked about.
And it's also about trying to bridge that missing middle in the Indian industrial landscape.
Right. But we've also seen that there are some very valid concerns, particularly from organizations representing micro and small enterprises. They worry about the potential for a concentration of benefits among the larger players and the negative impacts on access to procurement and credit for the smallest businesses.
And the timing of this change, coming right after the pandemic when many businesses are still recovering, has also raised questions.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Definitely. And I think for our listeners who are preparing for their UPSC exams, that's the key takeaway.
Absolutely. It's not just about knowing the facts and figures, but also understanding the nuances, the different perspectives, the potential trade-offs, and being able to critically analyze the intended and unintended consequences of a policy change.
Exactly. UPSC is all about that deeper understanding.
So here's a final thought for all our aspiring civil servants out there. Thinking about this reclassification and the fact that micro and small enterprises are the backbone of the Indian economy, what specific measures do you think the government should take to ensure that this change leads to truly inclusive growth, where everyone benefits, not just a select few?
What policies or programs could be put in place to specifically address the needs of the most vulnerable businesses and make sure they aren't left behind in this new environment?
It's a question worth pondering. And if you found this deep dive helpful as you navigate the complexities of the Indian economy and prepare for those UPSC exams, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.
We'd love to hear your thoughts and insights.
And we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that's shaping India. Until then, keep learning, stay curious, and all the best for your UPSC journey.
Have the best.
Just a reminder, all the information for today's episode was sourced from the Indian Express.